How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Had to have mine removed, and that was a lot of fun because we lived on the second floor of an apartment building and
going upstairs.
I
wanted to start the recording so we could hear about Todd's assist. He had to have removed.
Oh, it was fun. Yeah.
Justin just had one removed from his back. I had one, and Jennifer watched the removal. I don't know if this is the same kind of thing you guys are talking about. I just had like a lump under the skin, and it was on my back, and they had to, like cut it open and cauterize it. And I was awake. Yeah. I could hear it and smell it, but
they cauterized it like with heat.
Yeah, like cauterized the wound like while it was happening.
Because I just got stitches on mine.
She said what they pulled out was like bigger than a golf ball. Like
mine was not that big.
She's like, I don't even know how it was in there. Like she was like, it popped out. And she was like, ugh. It was really big. She was like, and she said like blood spurted out like a Cronenberg movie, I guess.
Yeah, this is a really good conversation to get into as we're
when they pulled it out.
She's
like, she said even the doctor with like blood shot straight up in the air, and the doctor and the nurse were just like, "Whoa, hey." They're like, how you doing? And I was like, good. And I guess whatever they were using, like I was holding on to the table, not table, it was the bed or whatever. I was holding on to it, and they were like, you gotta let go of that because I guess the thing they cauterize with is electric. And they're like, oh yeah, don't grab the metal. Like, we'll
yeah.
Oh,
like, oh,
yeah.
That's how Electro got made. I think that's his origin story. Is that right?
They were removing an assist.
Oh man, this is good content here. This is good stuff going into another David Cronenberg episode.
Yes.
Old man problems.
Oh yes,
no, for real, right?
3 middle-aged white guys talking about their medical procedures. Wonderful. Welcome to Cinema Shock.
Yeah, here we are. Yeah, so yeah, well, hello. And welcome to Cinema Shock, the podcast that explores stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
And I'm Justin Bishop.
And I'm your other co-host, Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you so much for joining us for this week.
Cool. Excellent. Good job, John.
Did you forget who you were?
Yeah, I'm new to reading. Sorry. And I'm your other co-host, Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us this week for our look at one woman's obsession with a fur coat in the second part of our series called The New Flesh, the body horror of David Cronenberg.
That feels like one of those descriptions of this movie that you read on like Charter, like Spectrum, where, you're looking at the upcoming, and that's how they describe RABID is one woman's obsession with a fur coat.
Yeah.
We're learning a lot about Cronenberg, and a lot of this is like the inside stuff that eats you alive or something comes out. Even when I was researching this time, I found like a story about like that apparently he saw The Fly, like the original Fly. He didn't, not his own Fly. He didn't see his own Fly as a kid, which is where the story was going. But as a kid, he saw the original and even got into a debate with the usher at the time about the head swapping part. That like how scientifically implausible that seemed.
I mean, he's not wrong. What an annoying kid.
I know.
What an annoying kid he must have been.
But you're starting to see like I was really interested in, like last time we talked about like his psychology or whatever, and like this the science thing is like a huge part of it. And I always thought Cronenberg and I thought body horror, and now with this one we're really getting into he's also like science, and the exploration of science is a huge one, and how it can fall apart and that sort of thing,
which is something that I think we saw it last week, we saw it this week, we're going to see it again over and over again. Medical technological advances gone awry
apparently in like his study in college, you know, that's when he became really obsessed with. I read a little bit more that he was actually a big study there, or the stuff that he was interested in was not only just the body, but also disease, and especially STD type diseases and how they work within the body. And so like, I guess that is where all of this comes from. He's just morbidly curious about shit like that.
Because he just seems such a like normal dude.
Well, and it's kind of like, you know, I feel like this is the best kind of exploration of something like that. It's kind of like watching, you know, you can watch National Geographic, or you can watch Wild Boys and watch them get stung and bitten by all these things and be like, oh, okay, big ants, they hurt a lot. Yeah, got it.
That's the result. That's the result of it.
Yeah.
So as we discussed on our last episode, Cronenberg's debut commercial feature Shivers was a big success. Really inexpensive movie to make. I think, what did it cost? Like $100,000 or something, 180 grand.
Yeah.
But it became one of the most successful Canadian productions of all time at the time that it was released. But its release was not without controversy, especially since it was financed by the Canadian government's newly formed Canadian Film Development Corporation. And it got some bad press. The bad press on Shivers, which was not regarding its quality, but regarding the question as to whether or not the taxpayers should be funding this type of movie. It did stall Cronenberg's career for a couple of years. According to him, that's why his career stalled for a couple of years, was because of that. And it due in a large part because that press led to the CFDC being kind of reluctant to finance his next film, because they didn't want to be kind of mired in that kind of controversy again. But eventually, about 2 years after Shivers, Cronenberg was able to follow that up, was able to release another film, one that would prove to be less controversial than the previous, but no less shocking to the audience. And that's the movie we're talking about today from 1977. It is David Cronenberg's RABID.
All around her, people are dying, and only Rose knows why.
You gotta come quick. You gotta come quick and get me.
It's Rose. It's gotta be. Something's happened to Rose.
Health officials have said they consider the outbreak of the new strain of rabies as being potentially the worst of this century.
Don't scream. Don't panic. He's dead, and the dead can't hurt the living. RABID.
The Prime Minister was reluctant to officially declare a state of emergency, but as any citizen in the streets can tell you, martial law has come to Montreal.
Shooting down the victims is as good a way of handling them as we have got.
You can't trust your mother. Your best friend. The neighbor next door. 1 minute, they're perfectly normal. The next, rabid. Pray it doesn't happen to you. RABID.
I saw like on this,
Mr. Cronenberg. You know, we have some concerns about your films, and you know, we were just reluctant to cut another check unless you get like a major star or something like that. Do you have anybody in mind?
Sorry. I only watch porno.
That is the thing is that's like, well, we'll get into it, but Cronenberg had no idea. He had no idea who he was casting in this movie. When
he claims to have never seen the movie. So yeah, we'll see. David.
Okay.
RABID's production, this is not going to be as kind of a juicy of a story as the making of Shivers. Shivers had a lot that kind of led up to its creation. It was made much more guerrilla style, kind of, I guess you'd say, because it necessitated that because it's such a small budget, and he had like 2 or 3 weeks to film the thing. After the box office success of Shivers, Cinepix, which was the company that had produced that film, they wanted a new script from Cronenberg. So they commissioned him to write something up. And the one that he offered them was RABID, although its original title was Mosquitoes, which I'm assuming is because of the little phallic proboscis that comes out of Rose's armpit. Kind of looks like a mosquito's nose thing.
Totally.
I don't know. It also kind of goes back to that thing we were talking about last episode where Cronenberg's really bad at naming movies.
I mean, it is just like, this movie's pretty similar to Shivers. It's got the epidemic, the experimental science. You got your typhoid Mary woman there, Rose. But now he's out. He's expanding. It's not just in like a little apartment. He's
Right.
in all of Montreal. So
Yeah.
but all of this is right up Cronenberg's alley. Apparently, he's writing all of this stuff at the same time. By the way, which I found fascinating. Like I saw like somewhere like The Brood.
All of what stuff?
Like all of his movies, like are all like happening. Yeah, or I mean, not all of them, obviously, but
Yeah.
he writes a lot of stuff at the same time.
Well, I know he had written Dead Ringers already by this time, and nobody wanted to do it. And Dead Ringers doesn't come out for another decade.
Yeah, well, he had what was it that I was hearing the story on? Kermode, Dan Kermode. We don't give him enough credit, by the way. That guy, Don Kermode is who I'm talking about. He was one of the producers that was brought in to assist Ivan Reitman and helping Shivers get made. He deserves a little bit of love. He was a guy who was also going to film school through this thing. He had tried to go to actual film school and didn't get anywhere, but he was like one of those guys that came into Canada, and there's not much of a film industry, just like Cronenberg. He talks about, you had the French Canadian movies out of Montreal and Quebec, and you had Cinepix, and a professor from film school used him for cheap labor and sent him to a shoot in Vancouver. And anyway, he made friends with Julie Christie. This is a lot of story for this guy, but he got assigned to drive Julie Christie, and she really liked him, so he just became her driver. And then,
that was on McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Yes, yeah, that was the shoot. So he was going to film school. Sit your asking. He was going to film school, and his professor would use some of the students for cheap labor, and they were like, "I got a friend who's doing something in Vancouver. Somebody wants to go work on a set," and he says he knew this program that had just started called like Drive Away, which is like you could be paid to drive a car across Canada or go to like Western Canada, and you figure out how to get back, but you just drive them there so they can sell these cars. And so he did that to get to Vancouver, and it was for McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And there he was working with Julie Christie and became her driver because she really liked him. And anyway, that led into him meeting up with John Dunning and Andre Link, and they hired him as their first head of production. And then for Shivers, like basically he just describes they came in one day and they're like, "Hey, here's a guy and he's going to be working on a horror movie and we need you to help him." And that guy was Ivan Reitman. So then the next day they went and met David Cronenberg and they were like, "Hey, we're here to help you make a movie called Shivers," or whatever they called it at the time. And then that's how that all happened. But he's assigned back to this movie again. He's him and Ivan Reitman, obviously.
What a wild ride, though, to like he gets hired. He's a driver for Julie Christie while she's making like kind of a prestige picture for Robert Altman, and that ends up segueing into him making this scuzzy little Canadian horror movie.
Yeah.
But it kind of kicked off his career.
And he talks about that like a lot of his story, he tells about how people were just like so up in arms about Shivers when it came out. And he thinks it's hilarious that Cronenberg's like a cultural icon now because he remembers like the heat everybody got for making that movie. And he says it was mostly because this was the first like exploitation film that the CFDC had gotten behind, basically. And so that article came out, and I was reading an article with or a thing with what's that guy's name? Calum Vatnsdal.
Oh, that's the guy who wrote They Came From Within, the book about Canadian horror movies.
Yes, that is him. And he got a chance to talk to that writer, by the way, that Fulford guy who wrote the Saturday Night Movies thing.
Oh, yeah?
Like 30 years later, he said he still hated that movie. And he refused to believe
At least he's standing behind his beliefs, I guess.
He refused to believe it had ever made money. But,
well,
but that Don Kermode guy, just to round him off, he ends up going on to, I mean, he's still working right now as a producer. He just moved down to LA, and this kind of became his bag. Like movies that weren't super successful at the time have become like something happens that makes them get like some kind of huge cult thing behind them. Like he obviously goes, he does Meatballs, I think, which is like his last thing on Cinepix. And then he goes and does like Terror Train and Porky's, and he's the producer that like helped get Boondock Saints made and stuff like that.
Yeah. As we mentioned in the intro, the CFDC was kind of reluctant to fund Cronenberg's next film because of the controversy behind their funding of Shivers. And that goes back to that article by that writer that Gary was just talking about. But also, since Shivers was the only thing that they'd funded that had ever made any money up to that time, they couldn't exactly turn down the opportunity to fund his next, because they had a pretty good idea that there would be a return on their investment like there had been before. So it's kind of hard to turn that down from a business standpoint. They just didn't want the press. So they did end up funding it, but they publicly kind of distanced themselves from the film. They didn't want it to be quite as apparent that this movie was as a result of their money.
It is worth saying that
for a penny, in for a loony.
It is. I don't even know what that means. It is worth saying that, yes, without them, Shivers would have never been made, or like Cronenberg, would not be who he is. Even though they're like distancing themselves, they're critical to the whole process, because there wasn't the private funding at the time that everybody was used to. But he so Cronenberg got canceled for a little while, essentially. I guess he was making like little half-hour TV dramas and stuff like
he was still doing some television and things like that,
but he was around. He just
he wasn't out of work.
He
just wasn't able to get another original film off the ground quite yet.
Cinepix took up for him too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off again, but they I was reading they had started like a what's the word I'm looking for, a campaign. Cinepix had taken up for him, starting a campaign called the big sign they would have going around was like, is there a place for horror films in Canada's film industry? And then they had this like they would do like write-ups about how there's a place for everything in Canada's film industry and blah, 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 which is weird because they got so much heat for this. And Carmody says that they thought David Cronenberg should be committed. Like, that's how some of the people in Canada thought. They were like, this guy's a nut job and needs to be institutionalized. And Carmody and Ivan, they were like, we're immigrants to Canada, and they kind of wanted us deported. It got really heated. But when you think about that Cinepix's early start in the industry is in softcore porn, it's real weird, like the standards here.
Yeah, and there were other horror movies being made in Canada around this time. Like Black Christmas came out in 1974, which is directed by Bob Clark. Although maybe because Bob Clark is not Canadian, I think he was American who was working in Canada for most of his career, because he made Porky's as well. And, of course, he goes on to make A Christmas Story. But yeah, for some reason, there was this kind of stigma around horror, even though Cronenberg was not the first person to make a horror film in Canada, but his was the first one to actually be funded by the Canadian taxpayer. So maybe that's why there was a little more pressure on him and his films. So Ivan Reitman came back aboard this time. He produced the film as he had done on Shivers, and he brought along a cinematographer named Rene Verzier, who was most known at the time for being the director of photography on a 1973 movie called The Pix, starring Karen Black and Christopher Plummer, which is another Canadian horror movie. Reitman also brought in editor Jean Lafleur, who had done a film called Death Weekend the year earlier, which was also produced by Cinepix. So he's bringing in these crew members because they were guys who had worked in the genre before. They'd worked in horror and they'd worked in exploitation films, and he knew that they could work efficiently while still putting out a good product. They were also, at least Jean Lafleur, he had worked with Cinepix before, so he kind of knew their way of working. Joe Blasco was brought back to do the film's special effects. This time he had an assistant, a guy named Bird Holland, who had done the effects on other low-budget genre films like Lamora and Ted Post's The Baby, which are a couple of other well-known Canadian horror movies.
The assistant thing, I think, happens because, last time I was interested in Joe Blasco, too. He is just a guy like Reitman just found, and he's out of L.A., I had assumed the last episode he was going to be Canadian, but he's just one of those guys Reitman knew and brought him to Canada. This time he didn't actually even come to Canada. He just built stuff and sent it. It's more complicated than Shivers, like the whole setup, but the makeup effects were kind of less so. They can make stuff and just send it into them. Reitman also, I think he's real to porno because this soundtrack sounds like a porno soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean a little bit. They're using library tracks here again, like they had done on Shivers. They still couldn't afford an original score, so Ivan Reitman fulfilled that role as well on this film as the. I think he's credited as music supervisor, is what they say, but basically he's the guy who went out and went through all these libraries of music that they were allowed to use and essentially created a score.
But do you think he went, oh yeah, I'll do the research, or he's like, no, I got one. It's perfect.
Once they found out who their leading lady was going to be, he was like, oh, she like comes with like entrance music. Like,
wait, what does she do with entrance music?
All right. So for the cast, Cronenberg brought back Joe Silver. Remember that guy who was in Shivers that we liked so much? The other
produced The Matrix.
He had a similar role here that he'd had in Shivers. I mean, he plays kind of a similar guy. And then Shivers Vlasta Varna. Do you think I'm pronouncing that correct? And Ron Milodzik also returned in some small roles. Milodzik plays like a patient at the clinic, the plastic surgery clinic. I think he's only in a couple of scenes, but he's returning here as well. So for the male lead, Cronenberg cast a guy named Frank Moore, who he had just collaborated with on an episode of one of those TV shows that he was working on during the 2-year interim between movies, a CBC series called Teleplay, which is a boring name for a TV show, but the episode was called The Italian Machine. And that was a story that showcased Cronenberg's fascination with race cars and motorcycles, which is, of course, a fascination that bleeds over into the opening minutes of Rabid as well, and one that will rear its head in future Cronenberg films as well. Cronenberg was super into motorcycles at this time.
The sequel, is it the sequel to Italian Stallion?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Is that a porno movie?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Or Sylvester Stallone.
It is.
Yeah.
So Cronenberg was really into motorcycles at this time, though. He was a motorcycle. He's a gearhead. He doesn't seem like he would be, like if you look at him and hear him talk about his movies, but once he starts talking about cars and motorcycles, like he is very much a gearhead. And he actually rode a motorcycle, like a Ducati that he owned, to the film set every day. That was his mode of transportation during this time. So he does. After this, he does actually make a movie about race cars, but that's always been fascinating to me for some reason, because he seems like such like this sort of intellectual who you wouldn't think that like race cars and working on engines would be something he was into, but he very much is.
Kermode says he has like a strict edict on the set of Rabid they had on Cronenberg. He was like strictly responsible for him, and it was like no filming could take place near anywhere that a gearhead would be interested in, or stereo stores, like because he said you would literally lose Cronenberg for hours.
I love that. So for the lead role in the film, one that serves as kind of both the film's heroine and protagonist, or antagonist and protagonist, I guess is the best way to say it. She's a little bit of both. She is the monster and the victim at the same time. A very sympathetic monster, if anything. So for that role, Cronenberg wanted a newcomer by the name of Sissy Spacek, he'd recently seen her in Terrence Malick's The Badlands. She was not very well known at the time, but he saw her performance. He liked it. But Rabid's producers, including Ivan Reitman, they didn't like Spacek for the role. They felt she was, one, too freckly, which is an odd thing to care about, and they didn't like her accent. She has a pretty strong Texas accent, and they didn't think that fit the film. And I am sure
we just think she talks kind of funny. Yeah.
I think that they would later regret this decision, since her star-making turn in Brian De Palma's Carrie was actually released while Rabid was in production, and of course we all know it was a huge success. And in fact, there's a scene late in Rabid where Rose, like, she kills a guy in a movie theater, in like a porno theater, I think it seems to be. And when she walks outside and she's walking down the street, you can see the Carrie poster on the wall behind her. So I'm sure they were all were all kicking themselves, because at the time that they were filming this, there was probably no hotter name in horror. Like if you wanted to cast a female lead in a horror film, Sissy Spacek would have been the ideal person to do, but they had already moved on by that point. So Reitman suggested casting a porn star by the name of Marilyn Chambers in the role, because he had kind of heard that she was looking to break into mainstream film. So we're going to have a little sidebar about Marilyn Chambers here, because I think, first of all, I can't think of another episode that we'll ever do on this podcast that we would need to talk about her
that kills my next series suggestion.
But I also think that her story is very interesting. So she began her career as a model while she was in high school, even landed some small roles in some movies, especially there was a movie called The Owl and the Pussycat that starred Barbara Streisand and George Segal. And she had a small role in that, but under a pseudonym, under the name of Evelyn Lang. I mean, Marilyn Chambers is a pseudonym as well. She had a little bit of film work, and because she wanted to be an actress. And when that film was released in 1970, she was sent to Los Angeles and to San Francisco on a kind of promotional tour, but she didn't receive any other roles or any other offers for roles as a result, except in a low budget film from 1971 called Together, in which she does appear nude. So she was already comfortable with that even early on. Together, by the way, this film was directed by future Friday the 13th director Sean S. Cunningham, and it also marks the first official credit by Wes Craven as a producer. And of course, Sean Cunningham and Wes Craven would later go on to collaborate on Craven's directorial debut, The Last House on the Left. So there's a fun little connection there. And I say first official credit by Wes Craven there because he definitely made some other films prior to Last House on the Left under pseudonyms, because he was also making porn.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, Marilyn Chambers, I think her name was wasn't like Marilyn Lee Briggs or something like that. I read some stuff with Joe Bob talking about her because he was
Marilyn Ann Taylor. Well, no, I think that was her married name, but Marilyn Briggs was her.
Yeah,
the name she was.
I remember him saying like, we may be related. I don't know, but
that's not his real name.
she had moved to Connecticut, and like Sean Cunningham was like her best friend or something, like, and so they grew up together. But like,
really? Huh.
Yeah, but I don't know, kind of crazy. And she's not from whatever story you might think about her. I mean, I think her dad was like an advertising exec, and her mom was a nurse, and so she just, she was just a girl with big stars in her eyes.
Yeah, I mean, she kind of fell into doing porn essentially. So what happens is she ends up moving to San Francisco because she kind of, for some reason, decided that San Francisco was kind of the entertainment capital of the world. I don't know why she picked San Francisco over Los Angeles, where she had also visited, but that was her way of thinking. So she moves to San Francisco, and she held several jobs while she was there, including being a topless model and a bottomless dancer. Now, do you think that means that only the bottoms are off and the top is still on, like full swetter? Like,
I saw your notes, and I was curious about that myself. So
they say it's
bottomless dancer.
It's when you, because San Francisco is slightly further north, it gets a little bit more chilly there. So you protect your chest. Liam Neeson said that to Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins, if you recall. Listen, you rub your chest, and your arms, legs, and vagina will take care of themselves. That's how it works.
I don't remember him telling Bruce Wayne that his vagina would take care of itself.
It's science. They learn the powders, you get the spikes on their hands, and then you learn about how to keep your vagina warm.
So she starts looking for work in theater and dance groups in San Francisco, and she wasn't having a lot of luck when she came across an advertisement in the San Francisco Chronicle for a casting call for what was being billed as a major motion picture. So she gets excited. She's like, this is my chance. She rushes to the audition, only to find out that the film in question was, in fact, a porno, which would be called Behind the Green Door. So she's like, fuck this. And she's like, this is not what I thought. She's about to leave when the film's producers, Artie and Jim Mitchell, who are brothers, they noticed her resemblance to Sybil Shepherd, who was, of course, a huge star at the time. And they invited her upstairs to their offices to kind of explain the film's plot to her. Now, we could do a whole episode, by the way, on Jim and Artie Mitchell, because their story is pretty fascinating as well. And it ends with Artie. He's turned into like a cokehead alcoholic who's kind of running the business into the ground. And then he is shot and killed by his brother. There was a movie made about it called Rated X that I think had Charlie Sheen in it.
Yeah. Wasn't it like Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez?
It may have been. I never saw it. I just remember it.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's about these guys.
One Mitchell kills the other with a .22 rifle and only gets 6 years at San Quentin because the judge kind of agreed that the brother was being obnoxious.
He deserved it. He was basically, the judge is like, yeah, he had that coming.
Yeah.
But for what it's worth, at the funeral, one of the eulogies was delivered by Marilyn Chambers.
Oh, well, nice. I guess.
So that's not something everybody gets.
Well, who plays Marilyn Chambers in that?
In the movie? Oh, that's a good question. I wonder if surely somebody plays Marilyn Chambers in it, right? If it's a biopic about them, this was a pretty big part of their lives. Someone named Tracy Hudson plays the role, and I don't know who she is. This is her main credit that she's known for, according to IMDb. The second one is for a role on a TV show called Pacific Blue, which I believe starred Mario Lopez back in the 90s.
Is that the one where they rode bikes?
No, that wasn't that one.
It's like a Hawaii.
Yeah, no, that's
show
it. Yeah,
something.
Bicycle Officers Patrol, Santa Monica, California. Yeah, so that was her other role. Anyway, this is a weird little side note on a side note that we've gone down. But okay, so
Marilyn Chambers, the biggest porn star with no boobies.
So they've she's got boobies.
I mean, she has boobies, but you'd picture like
this is the 70s. Like, it was way more natural.
No, Justin, let him finish. Gary, tell us what you think about the physicality of porn stars. Go for it.
Let's tell us, Gary.
I'm just saying what you would maybe imagine. But Justin's right. Also, in the set, I mean, you got to think too, because I went too far down the rabbit hole on all this too. But in the 70s, there wasn't porn, really, not porn movies. There were just short movies, like little short movies, and they were disgusting little hot things you could watch, and sit in your little theater and
sit in your garage and project it on a wall with your like 16 millimeter projector and crack a beer and that with your buddies, and that's
hang out with 20 other dirty guys wearing long coats
stack
and
parties
jerking off in a and the poor usher that has to come in after you, I guess,
with just a hose to spray the whole thing down. I hope.
But I mean, this movie Behind the Green Door was before, like, I mean, it was a breakout before like Deep Throat, which is one we always reference. Like, it was, I think this was a little before that.
Yeah, like a year or so. Like, they were both kind of part of what was considered the golden age of porn in the 90s.
I know you're going to talk about this a little bit, but it's so successful. I mean, the Mitchell brothers, they ended up using her for like 3 huge movies for this stuff.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. So
I'll come back to it, but let me just say this. Let me just say this about the plot of Behind the Green Door. It's about a girl. She's kidnapped, and she ends up at a sex club in like California or whatever. And but the big controversial scene in this is that she has sex with a very large black man who's a boxer, whose wiener
he's well endowed,
was a star. But his name,
star shaped,
this big black boxer's name, get this, Johnny Keys. So
no
That's all the time we have on today's episode.
That's amazing.
So indeed, somehow this dumb fucking joke has come all the way back around.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, you're welcome, everybody.
All right, so
check out Behind the Green Door, everybody. If you can, because you can't. I know it's hard to find.
I found it.
No pun intended. Oh, did you?
Yeah, I found it. It was on a really questionable website that probably gave my computer a virus, but I found it. It is really hard to find those old 70s porn. You'd think that I guess the rights are probably really hard to figure out, like, who owns the rights to a lot of these, but you'd think there'd be a market for that shit. But apparently, I guess not,
Yeah. But well, anyway, so just credit where it's due. Marilyn Chambers and Todd Davis are ahead of their time.
So Chambers she was kind of hesitant about taking a role in a porno. She had done nudity before, but obviously doing hardcore sex on camera is a whole different thing. She thought essentially that if I do this, it's going to ruin my chance at a mainstream career. But they explained the story to her, and she liked what she called the fantasy elements of the story. And she decided to sign on under the condition that she receive a pretty big salary, which they initially kind of balked at what she wanted out of this, but they wanted her enough to eventually agree. But she wanted a fairly hefty salary and 10% of the film's grosses. which is really what they kind of balked at. But they did agree to it, and they hired her for the film. And it is kind of hard to fathom now because porn is literally available with the push of a button anywhere. You can watch it on your phone if you want to, but at the time of its release, something like Behind the Green Door it became a phenomenon. It's an hour, and I think it's like an hour and a half long film that does sort of have a plot, at least in the first 20 minutes or so. Then it's just like straight up orgy for the rest of the movie. I think
she bangs Johnny Keys for like 45 minutes.
It's a lot. So it's literally most of the movie. It's just, but this movie, along with Deep Throat, as I mentioned before, they kind of helped usher in the golden age of porn. And Marilyn Chambers became one of porn's first crossover celebrities, like people who, were not just hiding in a sketchy porno theater. They knew who Marilyn Chambers was. And one of the reasons that the film and Chambers were so popular goes back to her days as a model before she signed on to do this role. One of her earlier modeling gigs was for Procter & Gamble, where she was known as the Ivory Snow Girl. She appeared on these boxes of Ivory Snow soap flakes. And she's basically posing as a mother holding a baby under the tag. The tagline for Ivory Snow was 99 and 44 100% pure. Which is very specific and a mouthful for a tagline, but that was their tagline. So she was supposed to be seen as like this pure, young mother. And, that was the image of her on the soap. So of course, when the Mitchell brothers found out that Chambers had had a previous career as the Ivory Snow Girl, they quickly capitalized on it by billing her as the 99 and 44 100ths impure girl. And you see how they did that. So people knew.
There's plenty of ads and stuff around where you can see her like holding up the detergent boxes over her boobies and stuff.
Oh yeah. So Procter & Gamble, of course, dropped her after they found out about her other career. But her image was so well known that it actually boosted the film's ticket sales. Like people were, they'd seen her on grocery store shelves and stuff, the Ivory Snow Girl. And now we have a chance to see her in this movie fully naked. And, so people went to see Behind the Green Door because Marilyn Chambers was in it, because they knew who she was. And she followed up Behind the Green Door with another film with the Mitchell brothers called The Resurrection of Eve. It wasn't the runaway success that Green Door was, but it was still a pretty big hit for them. But Chambers, she always wanted to be a mainstream star, a movie star. She wanted to be in legitimate films. And she had hoped that her celebrity as the star of Behind the Green Door, because she did have crossover appeal, she had hoped that would become a stepping stone to other films. But as she had originally feared, it actually hurt her chances at Hollywood stardom, because people knew who she was, but they didn't want her in their movies. Robert Altman wasn't going to cast her in his next film because she was infamous as the Behind the Green Door girl. She had been up for roles in a few mainstream films before. She was supposed to star alongside Rip Torn in a movie called City Blues, which was about a young hooker being defended by a seedy lawyer. Presumably Chambers would play the hooker and Rip Torn the lawyer, but I don't know. Maybe it could have been the other way around.
Hey, let's not assume. Rip Torn is incredibly versatile.
Oh, I mean, he's dead now, but
even more versatile. He's a little stiff as an actor.
Yeah.
There it is.
Well, that film was supposed to be directed by a legendary director by the name of Nicholas Ray. This is the guy behind Rebel Without a Cause and Johnny Guitar and a slew of some of the most essential film noirs out there. But the project ended up falling apart largely due to Ray's alcoholism and drug abuse. Chambers also claimed that she was brought in by none other than Jack Nicholson and Art Garfunkel to talk about a role in a film called Going South. But then, according to her, she says that they proceeded to ask her for cocaine, and they started to grill her about whether her orgasms in Behind the Green Door were real. So she got mad and she stormed out of the meeting. So, and
Hollywood, that's Hollywood meeting 101. Like,
yeah,
leave that stuff at home, fellas. Come on.
And that movie ended up getting made with Jack Nicholson. I'm not sure how Art Garfunkel was involved because he's not in the movie, and I don't know that he does music for it. I don't think he does, but maybe he was just there doing coke with Jack Nicholson. I don't know. And he found out that Marilyn Chambers was coming in for an audition and wanted to hang out for it. I don't know. I'm not really sure. She was also going to be cast in Paul Schrader's film Hardcore. Paul Schrader, writer of Taxi Driver, he's a great director in his own right. Hardcore is this movie that stars George C. Scott. It's about a father who is searching for his missing daughter, only to find out that she's become part of California's porn underworld. It's a really good movie, by the way. If you haven't seen Hardcore, it's pretty dark, as you can imagine by that kind of that plot, but it's really good. But ironically, the casting director took one look at Chambers and said that she looked just too wholesome to be believable as a porn queen in their movie.
It was kind of her thing, though. Again, back to the
the girl. She had that girl next door look.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
yeah,
which is weird because if you see her in later stuff, like where I would have first run across her on like Skinamax or something.
Yeah, where she hosted like she had a show where she was like an Elvira or Joe Bob type, but for softcore porn. Yeah, I don't remember what it was called, but I definitely saw it. Back in the day, I remember.
But at that point, like her boobs had gotten huge.
Oh yeah, she had a little bit of work done by then. Yes. Yeah. And she was older at that time, I think.
Oh yeah,
probably.
Yeah. She definitely had the madam vibe,
Yeah, I'd say she was at least in her mid 40s by that point, if not a little bit older. So anyway, back to Rabid.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I saw that.
As I mentioned, Ivan Reitman had heard that Chambers was trying to break into mainstream films, but that wasn't the only reason that he cast her. I mean, there's probably lots of people trying to break into mainstream films he could have picked, but he really wanted her in the film essentially for marketing reasons, because they knew that they were making Rabid for the exploitation market. And remember, Behind the Green Door was this big like mainstream success, so people knew who she was. So Reitman's reasoning was, why does a distributor from Spain, for instance, why do they want to see Rabid? Why would they care enough to see Rabid and import it into their country? Well, he'll go see it if Marilyn Chambers is in it, because they know who Marilyn Chambers is. And they knew that was bankable, that they could promote this as a film starring Marilyn Chambers and sell tickets. So the filming of Rabid, once they got on, they've got Marilyn Chambers, they've got their cast intact. The filming of Rabid was less eventful than Shivers had been. They no longer needed to sleep in the locations where they were filming. The crew of Rabid had a budget about 3 times that of Shivers, although it's about $530,000. So it still falls firmly into like the low budget category, but they had a lot more resources than they did before.
I did want to mention really quick that like they had, the budget on this movie is like, what would we say, like 500,000 or something, 530,000. So you can't afford a real star. So Marilyn Chambers, I don't know if this is the first example of stunt casting, but this is what this is now. And she came along with like baggage. Apparently there was a guy that was like her husband on the set. Chuck Trainer is his name.
Yeah. He was her manager and husband, I believe.
Yeah, and good for that guy. I mean, I say good for that guy. I don't know how that guy was, but he also apparently was married to like Linda Lovelace and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So he got around and like managed these people. Everybody hated him on set.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, Linda Lovelace wrote about him in her autobiography and said that he was pretty abusive, and that he had essentially coerced her into starring in Deep Throat. So granted, I mean, Linda Lovelace showed a lot of regret later in her life about her porn career because she became a Christian. So that could have stemmed from that. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that she wasn't telling the truth about him, but she was kind of ashamed of her previous life as a porn star. But Chuck Trainer, by all accounts, was probably not the best dude. I mean, he was a porn producer in the 70s. I mean, he's not going to be the most stand-up guy.
Well, and even for Marilyn Chambers, I mean, she had hoped this would turn into something. She took, they couldn't afford a star, but they could afford her. She wasn't charging, she was looking for the breakout role, like you're mentioning. And I think after, like, she hoped Rabid would help this and to round her out. It really didn't. She made like 15 more movies after this that were not porn movies, but all like shitty movies. And
and I'm not really sure why though, because she's pretty good in this, and I could see her having a mainstream career. So I'm not sure if it was just bad management or
the Joe Bob Briggs stuff I was looking at said that a lot of times too, like Chuck he had heard that Chuck had screwed that up for like people just didn't like doing business with him. So that also kind of screwed her around. The thing I wanted to cover too is we're going into this filming part. You might be wondering, like, because of all the heat they got for Shivers, like, why is everybody cool with Marilyn Chambers coming into to this movie? But it goes back to Cinepix is known for another thing, and that's softcore porn. And Canada has a whole industry of this stuff that is called
maple syrup porn.
Maple syrup porn.
Yeah.
Listen, don't knock until you try it. You know, next time you're with your lady, grab a bottle of our finest and, you know, just give it a little pour on her. She might like it.
You might think it's like meta that there's like a porn theater sequence in this, but that was already in the script before Marilyn Chambers was even a part of this.
Yeah.
That whole thing was happening. And
there's a film on when she walks out of that theater, it's advertising a film called Eve. And one of the movies that she made with the Mitchell brothers, one of the films that she was most famous for is called The Resurrection of Eve. So I wonder if that was done on purpose or if that was just a major coincidence.
That could be, but I figured it was worth mentioning maple syrup porn. It was not about like, you know, sticky stuff being dumped all over women's boobies, although you know, it could also be.
I'm sure that happened every now and then.
Yeah. If you if you Google maple syrup porn, you'll definitely, you know, it'll change the way you view breakfast. But what's funny about them is they were all softcore because there were like rules about them. Sorry, I went down this rabbit hole too, but there were rules about them. Quebec was so Catholic that they worked really well because of everybody being so uptight, but they had to have like a moral at the end of the story, basically. Like they had to come back around to like Valerie was one of Cinepix's first big ones, and it's about a girl who becomes a stripper and a prostitute, but eventually by the end she meets this artist, they fall in love, and she settles down and becomes a Catholic housewife. And so it's okay if at the end of this, like, you could be as crazy as you want to be up front, but you got to round this off at the end with a nice wholesome story.
That's so weird.
But yeah, the top distributor of maple syrup porn is Cinepix. They had, right before all of this Cronenberg stuff, I think they had one called Du Femme en R. I think it was their most popular. It's about two housewives who get bored, and so they just start banging everybody who comes to their door until the local pet shop owner shows up, and they have a threesome and he dies. But then they have to go on trial for murder, but the judge is okay with them and lets them off, and they go back to normal life.
So he lets them off and they get him off. Is that
I don't know if they actually
I wish people still made porn where it had like a full fucking plot. Like that's great.
That movie made like $4 million at the box office. That's Canadian money. So that's pretty good for, you know, and it's in French. All these movies are made in French. Like sometimes they get dubbed in English, but they're not, this is not like a big market. It's not like some huge thing. So to make that much money, anyway, you know, they've got a tradition of these things. So I don't know.
It was a whole thing.
I read when Cronenberg first came in, he was looking to direct one of them. He had tried to do one, Stompin' Tom Collins or something, which was like a cowboy movie he had tried to get in on. And then he was going to direct one of the pornos, the maple syrup porns, and it was called Laughing and Loving, which doesn't sound like anything pornographic or that David Cronenberg would direct. But just wanted to get all of that out there.
We appreciate your commitment.
Yeah, and in the porn theater, by the way, the two movies that are on the double feature there were Party Swappers and Models for Pleasure.
Were those real?
Yeah,
those are real movies.
It's Party Swappers is a Swedish movie. It's in Sweden. It's called The Intruders. But Models for Pleasure is I don't know. I couldn't find too much about that.
So this is
I've done the most research on the porno adjacent story.
Well, it really is an interesting part of Canadian film history, though. I mean, we're not just mentioning this stuff as sort of like, oh, it's funny or whatever, because it is genuinely part of this story. Not only because of Marilyn Chambers, but because of Cinepix and because of where the Canadian film industry was at this time. It's really there's kind of a wild history of Canadian cinema that sort of parallels Hollywood, but it definitely goes down its own path, and it's an interesting story. So they go to shoot Rabid, and they do have a lot more money this time around, $530,000, like we said, and they needed it because this was a much more ambitious film than Shivers. Shivers is pretty much all set within this one apartment building. I mean, they shot everything in one location, but in this one, there's a lot of locations, and as the film goes on and the virus spreads, the scope of the film gets much broader, and you bring in like the military, and you've got military vehicles, you've got ambulances, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it becomes a fairly big story by the end. So $530,000 for the story they were trying to tell was still a very small amount of money. And the makeup effects, as we kind of glanced over this before, but they were a lot less complex than those in Shivers, because this time, we mentioned Joe Blasco was still doing the effects, but he wasn't ever on set for the application of those effects. He just created them. These little appliances that they would attach back at his shop in Los Angeles, and then he'd send them to Montreal where Rabid was being filmed. So somebody else presumably would be on set actually applying these. So I don't have a lot of stories about the making of this, because the making of it was fairly uneventful. I mean, there just weren't a whole lot of anecdotes on the set of this,
Kermode tells a story about that he and Reitman were in a trailer like 2 weeks before they start shooting, and Cronenberg comes in and tells them, and I think this is related, so I'm putting these two things together, and I'm not 100% sure, but that Callum Vanderstadt guy also tells a story that Cronenberg was suffering a crisis of conscience during the time of preparation for this movie, that he thought people, when they saw the woman sucking blood with the phallic arm spike, that they were just going to laugh and not take it seriously. And he thought this was kind of dumb. And it took John Dunning and Ivan Reitman to convince them to proceed. I think this story is related. Kermode tells a story that they were all in the trailer, and Cronenberg comes in and says, I don't want to do this movie anymore. I had a dream last night, and I've been up all night, and I wrote something else. And I've been thinking about it. I don't want to do this instead. And the story he tells them about, Kermode says that we were all like, what? Were you fucking nuts? And he says, no, listen, I had a story about two twin gynecologists.
Yeah.
And then we just stopped. We're like, no, we are doing Rabid.
Yeah.
And they won. But that's Dead Ringers.
That's Dead Ringers. So he ended up making it later on, and it's a great film. And we're not going to cover it on the series. That'll be on our next David Cronenberg series. We talk about Dead Ringers. It'll actually be probably once we just do another Cronenberg series down the line. I think it'll be the first episode of that series. But
everybody says, by the way, that this is the last time they ever saw like Cronenberg have like a moment's doubt about what he was doing.
Nice. Yeah. Well, here is another fun little note about the making of this. So at the end of the movie, that final person that Rose infects, where she's waiting in her apartment, it's a very like intense scene where she's on the phone with Hart, and she's basically trying to kind of prove that she's not patient zero, or it's a moment of self-sacrifice. It could be read both ways, So she's in this apartment, she infects the guy. And of course, as we know, he ends up waking up and killing her at the end of the movie. But the guy that she infects is played by an actor named Alan Moyle. You might not know that name, but Moyle, he acted in a couple of movies after this, but he actually ended up becoming a director in Hollywood. And he directed Pump Up the Volume, the Christian Slater movie.
Yeah.
And he directed one of my favorite movies from the 90s, Empire Records.
Oh, nice. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Isn't that wild? What a weird connection. So I guess since that might be a good segue, since we're talking about a cast member here, we haven't yet asked Todd who he's trekking with this week. So did you find anything on this one, Todd? Was Marilyn Chambers ever in an episode of Star Trek that I don't remember.
Don't think I didn't look. I think she would have made a great Orion, or possibly a Vulcan, or you know what? She could have gotten her rage up and been one of those Andorians, but sadly no, Marilyn Chambers is not part of the Star Trek franchise. Missed opportunity there, but
at least the canon of Star Trek. Like, I'm sure she's
that's right,
possibly in some sort of Star Trek adjacent.
Look, it's behind the green door. Could be one of those whooshing doors that.
I hope that exists.
Dear Starfleet, I never thought I'd send a subspace transmission like this, but yes, besides Mr. David Cronenberg himself, Mr. Peter McNeil has a small role as loader. And I don't know if that's, dropping loads, making loads, throwing loads, whatever it is, but he is in this as loader.
And referring to
who am I referring to, or what am I referring to?
I don't get the load thing.
Loads.
Explain loads to me.
We'll talk about it off mic, Gary. It's, this episode's already running long. So he was also in an episode of Star Trek Discovery back in 2017. It was season 1, episode 7, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, as Baron Grimes. But nobody else, sadly, nobody else in the cast.
That's it. Just one guy. We don't even know who he is in this movie.
Yep. We just won. And we don't know who he is.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to happen on these, especially these like smaller exploitation movies. A lot of these folks don't have a long history in Hollywood.
Yeah. And that's something I'm noticing as I'm going through. Yeah. A lot of Canadian actors, a lot of, this was their only film that they ever were in all together. So yeah, these, honestly, these Star Trek connections are rare. They are few and far between. But
I mean, William Shatner's a Canadian actor.
That's true.
He should have been in this.
He should have.
There were people with rage, like Terrence G. Ross, who plays the farmer, who goes from like super drunk to I'm gonna rape you.
Yeah,
zombie
to getting a lot of rage
to give me some barbecue. Yeah. And that's everybody in Star Trek.
All right, so remember that magazine Cinema Canada that we talked about last week? That was one that was founded by Canadian cinematographers. They ended up being one of the few publications to kind of come to the defense of Shivers, going so far as to call it a masterpiece of modern horror. Well, they had felt the need to defend it because of the conservative writers kind of getting their panties in a bunch over the film's deplorable content. For Rabid, though, they wanted to go ahead and get ahead of the 8 ball. And they put out one of the first reviews of the film before any like unneeded controversy could arise, which this goes a long way into helping David Cronenberg in his career. So this was a pretty cool thing of them to do. They kind of ended up setting the tone for the film's reception. So before the film's release in April of 1977, they put out an article that celebrated Shivers, lambasting critics who had denounced it. And this is from that article. They said, Cronenberg, this is talking about Shivers, by the way, not Rabid, but this is kind of leading up to Rabid's release. They wanted to go ahead and say, hey, this guy makes great movies, and people shit on this other movie when it came out. And we're telling you why they should not have. So they say Cronenberg's film has suffered the same critical disdain that was accorded Psycho, Night of the Living Dead, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Perhaps serious art in the horror genre must be expected to be reviled before it is understood. Shivers, by whatever name, will join those classics. If Cronenberg continues to grow, this film will rank with Psycho as a personal statement. At the very least, it will rank with those other two films as a powerful expression of an anxiety of its day, so deep it hurts. I think they're overstating how good Shivers is to an extent, because comparing it to Psycho is like there's some big shoes to fill. But I appreciate what they're trying to do there, though. But they did put out one of the first write-ups for Rabid. They gave it a glowing review, which was not always the case, but they wanted to set the tone as to how people walked into this film, the mindset that they walked into this film. But I'm sure not everyone feels that way, even to this day. I'm sure there are some folks out there who have some issues with this film, Gary.
I don't know why you would think that. I mean, it's not like this is the internet that we're dealing with when we look at these films, and it's not like people stay up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning going on Letterboxd and writing a review when they should be taking a nap. James Day writes here, I consider myself a big horror fan, what with a video collection of about 110 plus, but this is a bad egg, of which I regret owning. I hate this film, to be perfectly blunt. The only Cronenberg movie that's half decent is The Fly. I found this film to be too slow, and character development was totally scarce. The FX are naff. Is that the sound that like Pinky makes?
Narf. That's Narf.
Narf. And it all seems like an excuse for ex-porn star Marilyn Chambers to get her kit off every few minutes. What's with the virus/mutant thing coming out of the armpit? Wouldn't it have been more creative to have it coming out of other more visible parts like the mouth or something? This could have been a good film, but to me, it's one of the worst movies ever made. Avoid.
That's what these reviewers love to call something the worst thing ever.
Yeah, they do. As a matter of fact, Justin, the next review is by Just Josh, and the title of the review is Worst Movie I've Ever Seen. First off, I was waiting 2 weeks to see the movie expecting something good, but this movie was just plain terrible. The graphics were stupid, even for the time, and the story was literally nothing. You don't even know how she became what she is and why that stupid needle comes out of her armpit every time somebody gets near her. I swear, so many deaths were for the same cause because some pervert wants to touch her you-know-what. You see people pulled out the sheets on her all the time. So much nudity, it ruined it. This movie is only for people who literally have no taste and like seeing perverts and the same naked woman running around half the movie. That's why I gave this movie 1 star. I swear, don't waste your time on this crappy film. All caps there on that last.
I mean, she's really not naked that often in this movie. Yeah, she's really not. And also, the graphics were not very good. What graphics are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
Do y'all think this is CG?
He played the Xbox version. I even remember more stuff with Kermode. He talked about that the hardest, like Marilyn was wonderful, and Cronenberg loved her dedication, and the only thing was that she kept constantly thinking she was supposed to take her clothes off on things, and we're like, no, you
don't have to do that. Yeah,
they finally worked in a scene. She can take her shirt off, but this is not that kind of movie. Let's see here. This person had a problem with the cover art apparently, because this is Hella. Says, oh man, this cover, that girl in the freezer has so little to do with this film. It was a 2-second shot of her. I was disappointed about that. I can't explain why, but here you go. Early horror porn, sexually active armpit, which has a vagina-ish hole plus penis coming out of it. Claw extension from the penis tip, which needs to feed on blood. Cronenberg, this dude has issues.
Maybe that cover art is a little. I've always thought that was really weird to choose as like the poster, because first of all, you cast Marilyn Chambers for her recognizability, and then she's not even used in the marketing material.
That is weird.
It's a girl who's got like 3 scenes in the movie, and one of like the less memorable death scenes. So it's always been really odd to me.
That's a good point. Emily says, if you're going to show me an armpit pussy, then at least give me more damn blood. Another movie I had high hopes for because I'd heard and read so much about it, but ultimately it was let down. God damn. I was bored as fuck. It started pretty good, but along the way, the story got blood. The kills were just lame. Especially as a zombie-like film, I did appreciate that one operation room scene. That was crazy, but I don't know. Maybe another rewatch will change my mind. I really wanted to like this.
So unlike some of the other prudes that are reviewing this person didn't think it was violent enough.
Emily wanted more. Emily expected more out of you, David Cronenberg. Teriyaki Kush says, the contagious armpit monster woman from Toronto turns people into zombies. What the fuck? Ride your motorcycles carefully or you can create the next contagious armpit monster woman from Toronto.
This is not in Toronto. This is in Montreal.
Good point. All right, Cushy.
Completely different part of the country. Yeah.
In connection to our last series, this review comes from someone named Matrix Cat. extremely Chad movie from Cronenberg to write a movie that starts with woman gets into motorbike accident across the road from plastic surgery clinic and requires life-saving titty skin transplant surgery to survive. But after that, it feels like they just filmed enough scenes of people biting each other to get 90 minutes. They called it a day. Great performance by Marilyn Chambers, though, and I love seeing Joe Silver again. The pickle-eating guy with the hilariously deep voice and enormous nose from Shivers is in this.
They call him the pickle-eating guy.
The pickle-eating guy.
I mean, that's not an inaccurate way of describing his character in Shivers.
Yeah.
He does have a large nose.
Yes.
And a very deep voice.
Yeah.
So there you go. Those are the people that I chose that needed a nap this time.
All right. Well, then how about you guys? What did you guys think of it? Had you seen it before?
I've not. No, this was first viewing for me.
Okay. And Todd, you liked Shivers. I was not expecting you to like Shivers, so you did enjoy that one. Did you enjoy Rabid?
Honestly, no, not really. I kind of, Emily's, to go back to what Gary was just reading, Emily's review was actually kind of
you wanted more blood.
Well, let me at least say I thought the close-up shots of the things like moving around in her armpit and stuff like that, I was like, okay, it looks good. It's that's kind of cool. It is a little confusing as to how that all kind of came to be from them like removing a piece of her thigh. I was like, okay,
it's experimental surgery. That's all you need to know.
And I mean, and Marilyn Chambers is fine. I mean, I don't really have anything to compare her performance with from my own viewing, but like, I don't know. It just kind of fell flat for me. I don't know. I mean, I really was trying to like, look at performances and like the prosthetics and everything, but it just kind of, I don't know. This one didn't really hit for me.
Suck Johnny Key's dick, Todd. No, I like this movie. I actually like this movie better than Shivers. Honestly, it feels like a more well-rounded version of Shivers. I'd seen it once before, and like some of that Joe Bob stuff I mentioned. This is why it's not on Shudder anymore, but it was part of one of the first marathons that Joe Bob did when he came back. I think that was the first time I'd ever seen it. Nice. But I liked it better this time around. Like even more than that time. I would get why people wouldn't like it, because it is very, I don't know, stuff's not fleshed out. I watched the remake right before we recorded this, and we can talk about that later, but I get that the characters don't really seem fleshed out. It just kind of jumps right into this thing. Also, we talked a lot about, I could get into like my issues with Cronenberg so far, but one of them is, actually the main one is that last movie I was focused on saying like, oh, people think he's a woman hater. I think he loves his women. And I think we talked about John Dunning was also a big part of having like female like leads, like important female leads. And that's still very clear here. What he sucks at is, at least at this point, and I'm saying this because I think he fixes it later, but his men just suck. Like they're just idiots.
I mean, but I don't
boring.
That might be intentional though.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I think, like I said, I think he's gonna. At some point, he turns that around because we're gonna get Goldblum eventually.
You're right,
and James Woods and stuff like that. So like, he's obviously gonna care about it a little bit more. But yeah, at least at this point, that dude, I forgot his name already, but
Hart is the character's name.
Yeah, but he's just kind of like, oh wow, that
he's
guy.
Just kind of a doofus. That's he's just kind of a doofus of a character. But I don't know that's. I think that might be intentional. I think
you might be right, because maybe he just doesn't believe in like heroic dudes coming to save the day and stuff like that. Like you're right. Maybe that's part of it. But otherwise, yeah, I like the movie, and I love the effects. I love the effects of the phallic thing, and
it looks cool, especially for what they're working with here. I mean, this really does feel like kind of a continuation of what Cronenberg started in Shivers. The themes are very similar. Once again, it's about a contagious virus. It's almost he calls it a companion piece to Shivers, because they are very similar, have very similar beats. But this time, I think the filmmaking is more refined. It looks better. It sounds better. The camera movements are smoother. It's a much more professional looking production than Shivers, I think. And the crisis that unfurls in the film goes much bigger than the one in Shivers, whereas Shivers ended with the infected leaving their apartment and going out into the world, or going out into Montreal at least, only kind of hinting at the possible worldwide horror that might be to come. Rabid's final act kind of shows us exactly how that type of crisis would play out. It shows you what happens after the end of Shivers, which I think is pretty cool because they had more resources to do that.
Right. Well, it's something that did stick out to me was there were a lot of different sound bites, different, mostly things on the news that I was like, honestly, if you clip this out of the film, this could be about stuff happening today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it has people showing their vaccination cards and stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
crazy.
that's kind of eerie, but
he also, that's part of how he's evolved as well at the way that he tells his story, because in Shivers, a lot of the information we got about the parasite came from simple like exposition conversations. You've got Joe Silver's character kind of explaining things, kind of a boring way to convey information just by having someone literally talk about it. Right. Whereas in Rabid, you get it through like phone calls, news reports, things like that. You kind of get an idea of everything that's going on in a less direct way, but I think that makes for better storytelling because it feels more natural, a less forced way of conveying the information, which I think that's just Cronenberg learning his craft even more.
Well, a big part of this too to consider also is the way that you view this movie. I mean, a lot of people are going to look at this movie like a zombie movie, which they're not zombies. I don't even think it's rabies, really. And
they describe it as similar to rabies, I think, or they think it's rabies at first, but it's really not. It's just something with similar symptoms, I guess.
I think Cronenberg's got a strong grasp on reality. And so what I was going to say here is that, I mean, part of this movie is also inspired in 1970. There was a thing called the October Crisis. The Font de Libération du Québec.
Your French is amazing.
Thank you so much. It's the Quebec Liberation Front is what that is, and we will call them the FLQ for the French version. But they basically they wanted independence for Quebec at the time, and they were terrorist bombers, kind of like the IRA.
They putting bombs in mailboxes and stuff.
Yeah, they kidnapped a cabinet minister and a British diplomat in Canada, ended up killing the cabinet minister. The prime minister of Canada at the time, Pierre Trudeau, invoked martial law. I think it was called like the War Measures Act, and basically just let troops pour into the city and just start rounding up people, especially anybody that seemed like a suspect. And basically, I think a few hundred of these people got away to Cuba or something, but they found the diplomat and got the people and stuff like that. But it was like a bloody thing. And the FLQ was like a scary thing for Canadians at the time. Like they bombed the stock exchange too. And so Canadians are watching this movie and thinking like streets with like troops walking up and down them are a scary sight. And they've just been a part of this, or this is really close to them, while we're watching it thinking like, oh, this is a zombie movie. But for them it was more about the outcome, like this bigger outcome of what happens when the plague takes over, and then what the government does about it and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much inspired by that, because that the October Crisis is considered like one of the darker moments in Canadian history. And it was a very recent piece of history when audiences were watching this movie. So it really kind of hit home for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. And two of the biggest names in the FLQ were the Rose brothers. So,
oh, really?
Rose. Yeah. So
interesting.
Rose there.
Yeah. And you've also got, you've got some of the some similar themes that you saw in Shivers and kind of stuff that you'll see throughout his films, but you've got a deadly virus that is the result of medical experimentation, performed by a kind of mad scientist. You know, Keloid at least seems to kind of have good intentions. Like he's not being nefarious like the guy in Shivers was, but but once again, there's also the sexual element to its transmission because of the placement of her stinger, I guess you'd call it. Rose kind of has to embrace her victims. She kind of rubs their head like she's hugging them, like she's comforting them, but she's really feeding on them. You know, that's very similar to how in Shivers, the virus was sort of treated as a sexually transmitted disease. And of course, there's also the fact that the stinger itself does look both phallic and vaginal at the same time. Like they managed to make it look like both. So
yeah, I think I saw Joe Bob said this thing's got like an anus, a penis, and a vagina. It's everything a Thailand pimp has been familiarized with.
But one of the big differences, I think, here, and this might go back to some of Todd's criticisms on it, but I think that Cronenberg is less concerned with the characters here than he is with how society responds to the crisis. And this could also call back to his feelings on the October crisis. You know, he's more interested in the aftermath of society breaking down and the failure to respond to that properly, and what that looks like at the end, by the end of the film, how they've let it kind of go out of control, you know, how they've let this major outbreak essentially run rampant, which, you know, has no, I'm sure us living in 2022 can't relate to that at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these people like going into the AIDS crisis and that sort of thing. The thing with Cronenberg is he's very atheist. And so I also appreciate that, like all of these movies, and I think this continues, we'll see, but that he's not messing with really anything like supernatural at this point. He's just dealing with the science of it. He's trying to it's also extra scary because Canada just looks bleak anyway, I think.
Yeah,
but it's just cold and bleak, but
perpetual winter. Yeah.
But I don't know that he ever really veers into the supernatural. I think even stuff like the Dead Zone, you know, I think that it all kind of is scientifically based. I don't think
but also he's not really dealing with like evil or any of that stuff. He doesn't seem like interested in messing with any of that stuff. He's dealing with like humans and the science and trying to move along science, and then those issues along the way, I guess. I mean, because even in this one, so this movie got ripped a little bit too. Like I think some people like compared it to The Crazies and like so Romero and stuff like that. But even more so than Romero, like Cronenberg's not. He's dealing with like, I mean, plastic surgery at the time wasn't something normal people just got on the reg. Like plastic surgery was like you're super rich, or you know, you've been damaged terribly or something in some way. The thing they do, the operation, is he calls it morphogenetically neutral skin that he's putting. But Cronenberg's predicting stem cells is what's happening in this movie, and so he's doing the Star Trek thing of like just introducing science that's like he probably knew something about, but nobody really, you know, it wasn't there yet. You know?
Right.
So I guess that's a good segue then into our further viewing segment of the show. If you guys were to pair this as a double feature with another film, let's say not Shivers, because that's an obvious double feature.
Right.
What would you pair along with this?
To be honest, I mean, looking at, so, you know, knowing that this kind of started off with some mosquito elements, since that was the original title. And
you're going to say fucking Jurassic Park.
No. But since there was sort of like an animal element mixed with the human, I'm not going to go fly either. But, you know, you had non-human mixed with a human to create this other thing that makes sort of a classic movie trope, the zombie thing. I'm actually going to go with Dog Soldiers. I really like that. And I feel like this is kind of like the calm before Dog Soldiers, the storm. And, you know, mixing those to get, you know, a werewolf, you know, pretty intense werewolf features, I think would make a good double header.
The detours that Todd's mind takes to get to his double features fascinates me.
It really is.
We don't know
there's
what
the
he's gonna
obvious
like.
ones you should be going with. Like I was gonna say like Blackula. No, I'm actually gonna recommend you watch the remake of this by the Soska sisters.
I watched it this morning.
2019. Oh, so did
Pretty
I.
good.
Yeah,
pretty good.
I thought it was good. I was like, this movie's pretty.
It's pretty good. It's definitely.
I didn't realize there was a remake.
Yeah, there was a remake in 2019 by Jen and Sylvia Soska, otherwise known as the Soska sisters, who kind of got known for a movie called Dead Hooker in a Trunk, I believe is what it's called, and American Mary. They also did See No Evil 2, starring Kane. They did a movie starring The Big Show that I can't remember the name of. And of course, RABID has a sort of extended cameo by CM Punk. So they're really into wrestlers in their movies.
Nice.
CM Punk plays one of the victims of Rose in it. And Rose is played by the girl who plays Supergirl on Smallville. I can't remember her name, but
no, I know who you mean. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on her name though.
I thought it was pretty good. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, and it definitely goes in some very different directions. For one, Rose in the remake is more complicit in, like, she chooses to have surgery, whereas Rose in Cronenberg's version, it happens while she's asleep. So which
not before her face gets insanely fucked up.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, she gets pretty fucked up in her her motorcycle
Rose
accident.
gets fucked up in this one, and the effects are I love them, but
pretty good. The last 10 minutes are insane.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can tell with some weird directions. Soska sisters, they're probably somebody we'll do a series on someday, but the like if you've seen American Mary, which I'm actually a big fan of too, not just because Catherine Isabel is the lead in that, and I love her so much, but they clearly have different interests than Cronenberg. I mean, not that they shy away from the interests in this movie, like they pay respects to the science part of it, but the Soska sisters have there's a feminine and the perception of femininity in a lot of their stuff, it seems like. So like American Mary is also a lot about plastic surgery and like body modification and that sort of thing. That's how I feel like this movie goes to. It deals a lot with the fashion industry and like that sort of kind of a similar type of thing with this version of RABID, but the armpit monster does make its appearance later on in the movie, and it looks wild. It looks definitely more like a penis than even Cronenberg's version. And the finale of the movie is just a whole bunch of what the fuck. So.
Yeah, it really is. It's definitely worth checking out. I've been wanting to see it for a long time, and I just never got around to it. So I kind of used this as an opportunity to finally watch it. I would also say another good one for a double feature would be The Crazies, which you mentioned, because they do share similar, like, virus makes people go nuts kind of thing, but it's not exactly a zombie movie, which also leads me to my other recommendation, which is 28 Days Later.
Nice.
The way that the infected behave in this are very similar to like the rage virus that from 28 Days Later. I have to think that Danny Boyle was somewhat inspired by RABID when he made that movie.
Yeah, that feels right. I really thought you were going to go with I Am Legend, but
nope, not a fan of that one. But there are vampire. I mean, there is a vampire element to RABID as well. I mean, Rose is essentially a vampire that creates zombies, even though they're not actually zombies. They behave like we expect movie zombies to behave,
for sure. Right. And RABID, the remake definitely leans way more into that than
for sure. Absolutely.
Hey, so the fun little thing that I joked with the boys before we started rolling that I actually did some extra research, which I don't normally end up doing, but if you want to kind of go down a side rabbit trail with Cronenberg, go watch Rick and Morty season 1 episode 6, Rick Potion number 9, because they end up turning the entire population of Earth into Cronenbergs, and they are very Cronenberg-esque monsters.
Oh yeah.
And I had
good episode.
I completely forgotten about that, and I was watching it yesterday. I was just like, I have to mention this on the show tomorrow.
So your research was watching Rick and Morty.
Yep, that's it.
That is a good episode though, so it does fit in. So
that's wild. Right, so, I will say this. So the things you look for in Cronenberg so far, right, are dumb fucking male leads, and you look for the science more. So I think the science is this is a revelation to me. I'm sorry, because I just mostly thought of body horror, and I guess we're getting there more and more. Eventually, he's going to blow up somebody's head, but for now, it really feels like he's like science gone wrong. That's like his big deal.
But even in his stuff where the body horror is much more showy, I guess you'd say, they are oftentimes the result of some sort of science, or whether it be an experiment or just natural evolution or whatever. We're going to see that a lot on our next episode. Next episode definitely gets way more into like the horrific body horror, at least in part of it. So at this time, Cronenberg and Cinepix, they go to release this movie. They set up a distribution deal in the U.S. with Roger Corman's New World Pictures to distribute it here. And the film went on to gross over $7 million, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but for a movie that only cost $500,000, that's a pretty good return on investment. And it actually made Cronenberg Canada's most bankable director at this time. They knew that this was a guy who his movies are making money. So his star is rising. But he was also never really content to be just a horror movie director. Remember, we talked about this in Shivers. When he sits down to write his scripts, he doesn't specifically aim to write them within the confines of a particular genre. He just kind of goes where a story takes him, which in most cases is to some pretty dark, fucked up places. But even at this early stage in his career, he did begin to show some diversity by following up Rabid with a movie called Fast Company, which is this kind of, it's a racing drama. It's about drag racing, essentially. So it kind of, this fascination with motorcycles and race cars and things like that. He actually made a movie about it, and it does not feel like a Cronenberg movie at all, except for one scene where a guy pours motor oil on a girl's naked boobies. But other than that, it doesn't feel like a Cronenberg movie. And we're not going to devote a whole episode to Fast Company because we're kind of trying to focus on the body horror films that Cronenberg was making at this time. And Fast Company is very much an outlier in his filmography. He even says so. But for a Cronenberg completist, I do think it's worth watching to kind of see his growth as a filmmaker, because it's definitely his most commercial feeling film at this point. And it also marked the first time that Cronenberg made a film that didn't originate from an original idea of his own. He's working from somebody else's script that he rewrote. Furthermore, it put him in contact with cinematographer Mark Irwin, art director Carol Spire, sound editor Brian Day, and film editor Ronald Sanders, all of whom became regulars among the crew of his later films. He would work with all of them for at least a decade, some of them for multiple decades after Fast Company. So there are some important things happening behind the scenes on that film, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about that more on our next episode. But it also marked the first time that he worked with an actor by the name of Nicholas Campbell, who has kind of one of the co-lead roles of the film, and he would later appear in The Brood, The Dead Zone, and Naked Lunch. So he's making some connections on Fast Company, even if it almost feels like a paycheck movie. I'll get into some reasons as to why he filmed it in our next episode, but we're going to skip ahead to the film that he made directly after that. It's a film that is often considered Cronenberg's first truly great film, of his first body horror masterpiece, and that is from 1979, The Brood. So we're talking about that next time. It's a fun film. I think it's on the Criterion channel right now, because Criterion did put out a really great Blu-ray of it a couple years ago. So really easy to find. As always, head to cinemashock.net, where you can find links to stream all the episodes in this series. And you, of course, while you're there, you can listen to episodes. Every episode that we've done is on there. You can find links to our Discord, our merch, all that stuff. That's your one-stop shop for everything about the podcast. And of course, as always, we ask that you rate, review us on Apple Podcasts. Now you can do it on Spotify. So give us a 5-star review and tell your friends. You guys have anything else? Or are we done?
No, I just I think the reason I brought up the science part earlier was I was going to mention that you almost wanted to call, you gave us the option of maybe the science of blood or something like that. Wasn't
no, the Baron of Blood is what it was. That's a nickname of Cronenberg.
Oh, I was thinking there was a quote of his that you had pulled. Something
The Shape
from.
of Rage was the other.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Well, I was thinking something in there was science, so never mind. We picked the right one.
All right, so we'll be back next week. Until then,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Potato Man loves Ketchup Man. And Johnny has the keys.
What the fuck is that?
That is the only goddamn quote from the movie on the IMDb quote page.
True, though. That's a Joe Silver quote. So
that's what he's talking. He's just talking to his kid watching TV.
And as we learned in this episode, Johnny was
Sure does.